Captain.
Hey, Commander, how you doing?
All right. We are live on the air on Revolution Radio and Will Spirit Radio. No, we're not. No, we are.
Awesome.
We're live on the air on.
Greetings,
no,
greetings.
we're not.
Greetings to everybody. Is this the only day I should call in? Is this the only day you're doing the show on?
Yeah, that's right.
Revolution
that's right.
and Will Spirit on Monday.
Yep.
Okay.
For some reason.
Any burning questions or concerns or anything we think we'll talk about?
Well, number one, how's you and how's the eye? This is all, very important stuff.
Okay, well, if anybody,
stuff.
first off, if anybody wants to write me, they can write me at Sean Morton at P.O. Box 24549, Tucson, Arizona, 85734. My number here is 730-55112, but anyway, it'll get to me. Still blind. They've still blinded me in my right eye. I still can't see anything out of it. It's just a big black sploogey blur. It looks like a Nigerian family got hit by a bus. And so I keep complaining about it, and I keep putting in requests to have it fixed, and they just won't do it. So now I'm just going to tell them, since I have a top bunk here that if I can't see, I can't get in and out of and I can fall down, and I can kill myself, and I can sue them. So we'll see what happens there. Meanwhile, I think Melissa, all the slave labor they have her doing, she tore her rotator cuff, I guess, in her shoulder. So they're talking about surgery and x-rays and all kinds of stuff. So first she breaks her foot working on a rotating floor buffing machine that breaks and gets that control and spins around on it, runs over her toe. And then she tears her rotator cuff because they had her doing manual labor pulling mattresses out of there. And I keep saying, honey, you're an old lady. There's all kinds of people in there that are physically fit enough to do that kind of stuff, so you should do it. Anyway, what I figured we'd talk about today is the moon, which is one of my favorite subjects.
When the moon...
this last week. Go ahead.
When the moon is in the seventh... Yeah, so, there's loads of stuff about the moon because it's not what we think it is it?
Well, it's sort of like talking to people about the moon and it being artificial is a pretty easy argument. It's almost as easy an argument as convincing people that they switched out Paul McCartney after a car crash in 1966. It's like he's like 4 inches taller, and before that he had brown eyes. He had brown eyes. Suddenly he's got green eyes. His fingerprints weren't the same when he got arrested in Japan. All kinds of crazy stuff. So since it was the 49th anniversary of the moon landing, and these are people that I knew personally. It just hurts my feelings. All the people, if we did go to the moon, are the same people that now apparently there's something like 40% of millennials who actually think the Earth is flat, including this guy I used to room with. He's just an idiot. So let's talk about the moon. As far back as 1978, when I was in college, I used to be on a national radio show with a man named Joey Reynolds, and he used to have me on to talk about the moon and space stuff and UFOs and all that kind of thing. All of the astronauts belong to a club that my dad started called Jerry Morton's International Turtle Club. My little brother's godfather is Gene Cernan, who they claim was the last man on the moon with Apollo 17. My godfathers were Harrison Jack Schmidt, who was also the U.S. Senator for New Mexico, and David Scott, who drove the lunar rover on Apollo 14. And we do have a base on the moon, which is detailed in my third book, The Isomer Protocol, which is part of the Sands of Time series, which is called Cape Malabar Radio. There's a whole big reason as to why that is, which is at the north pole of the moon, right on an ice field, because there actually is water on the moon. So we actually mine the ice field for water on the moon. But here's the fun, interesting things about the moon. The people that say we did go to the moon are because of they claiming scientific impossibilities for the reason that the astronauts maybe couldn't survive while they were there. But here's the big lie that NASA is telling you, is that the scientific information that we have about the moon is not accurate. What they're telling you the moon is, and what they're telling you the scientific facts about the moon are in fact lies. And they had to admit to one of the biggest lies when we kept sending the Mariner spacecraft up in the 60s. In fact, Mariner 7 actually came into a crater and photographed what looked like almost like...
This call is from a federal prison.
It looked like a gas station on the edge of the crater. And we kept having stuff that just kept crashing into the moon. So Wernher von Braun, of course, the Nazi rocket scientist, got all pissed off about the fact that, his rockets weren't just crashing into the moon until they told him that the lunar gravity is not 1/6 the gravity of the Earth, but is in fact 60% of the gravity of the Earth, which made the perihelion point of the moon. Like I think they were telling him it was like 30,000 miles or something, but it turned out 68,000 miles, which was messing up everything. So the moon is first off, the orbit of the moon is what's peculiar, and we could say we go into the legends of where the moon actually came from. If you go far back as Chariots of the Gods, Eric von Daniken, Ancient Aliens, and all that, he talks about the moon being a sort of a spacecraft that came from the star system Epsilon Eridani, where that star went supernova about 100,000 years ago, and supposedly maybe brought the Asiatic races, or the Chinese, who revere the moon, who still talk themselves as the Mu dynasty, which was the first dynasty. That's the original son of Heaven. Even when they came to this country, they were called the Celestials. So the legend is they came here inside the moon. The joke is they were aiming for Mars, and they don't drive so well. They wound up here. But the moon we discovered was a first off, you can talk about the orbit. It's the second largest moon in the solar system next to Io, and of course Io is very volcanic, and there's all kinds of stuff that goes on Io. But the fact that the moon is so huge, it's basically only slightly smaller than the planet Mercury. And the moon has a perfectly circular orbit, and that was necessary for life on Earth, actually, because if the moon had an elliptical orbit, in other words, where it came in real close to the Earth and then swung way around, which is the logic of an object that's that large being captured by the relatively minor gravity of the Earth, then every 28 days you would have 3,000-foot tidal waves that would wipe out all life on Earth. I mean, if the moon swung around, it would gather up all the water, and you'd have these massive tidal waves. And it'd be almost exactly like the movie Interstellar, where they landed on that planet for a while, and they only have a few minutes until another tidal wave comes around. So the fact that the orbit of the moon is perfectly circular, matter of fact, they discovered, NASA scientists in the 60s, there was a because I used to live in Houston, because my dad was working at, we were back and forth between Southern California because he was a vice president at TRW, but we were building all the stuff for the Apollo program, so we'd go back and forth to Mission Control in Houston. And these scientists basically just did the math on how long it would take for the lunar orbit to decay from a perfect circle to an ellipse. And they actually discovered that the moon was actually that the orbit began to decay. The moon was away from us at about 6 feet a year or so. But they actually came to the conclusion that the moon was parked in orbit approximately 76,000 years ago, which then confirms directly in with the Zacharias Sitchin aspect of certain things in 3,600, 36,000, whatever. The orbit of the Earth to the moon also is exactly pi r squared, the distance of the Earth to the Sun. If you actually take measurements around the base of the Great Pyramid of Giza, again,
this call is from a federal prison.
One measurement is from the Earth to the moon, the other measurement is from the Earth to the Sun, and we are one of the only planets, really, that has the perfect solar eclipse that we can see. As a matter of fact, the last perfect eclipse was back in 2012, and now with the moon moving away, it's sort of this, the eclipse is actually moving a little bit, so it's not going to be a perfect eclipse. We discovered with Apollos 11, 12, and then 13, when Apollo 13, all the retro-rocket package crashed into the lunar surface, we actually had seismographs on Apollos 11 and 12. We also had one on 12, and we also did the same thing with 12. So we confirmed it, that the sound, as it traveled through the moon, and there's a mathematical formula for sound traveling through different types of solid substances, it went from 5,000 feet per second for a few seconds, and then went to about 48,000 feet per second, which means that the outer layer of the moon is primarily iron oxide, but then when you get down about 23 miles or so down into the moon then becomes a huge hollow titanium yttrium sphere. And both times with Apollo 12 and Apollo 13, when the retro-rocket packages actually crashed into the lunar surface, the moon rang like a bell. Actually, with Apollo 12, it rang for about 4 hours, and then Walter Cronkite came on the TV and said it rang for about 8 hours or so with the retro package with Apollo 13. And there were a lot of people that thought that Apollo 13 may have actually had a nuclear weapon in it that they were going to explode to find out what the moon is made of. You will also notice that the craters on the moon are all on the front side. The reason for this is because if you look at the back of the moon, it only has one big crater, which the Russians named because they were the first ones to send a probe around the back and take photos, which I believe, if I get the pronunciation right, is called the Tsaroslavsky crater. The Tsaroslavsky crater is a giant octagon. It's a huge stop sign. It actually has an 8-sided edge. And one of the interesting things about some of the UFO lore throughout the solar system is that Arthur C. Clarke in 2001 and then 2010 and then he did another book, I think 2050 I think is what it was. He talked about these big obelisks that were actually kind of the shape of a dollar in the shape of a the obelisks from 2001. That these were like the Swiss Army knives of the aliens, if you will. Well, the only thing that's wrong about that is that what we see throughout the solar system is we see these giant tubes, these UFO tubes that are miles long. We photograph them off in the orbit of Mars. We photograph them in Grand Junction, Colorado. It appears like every 8 years if you go to Grand Junction, Colorado. I want to say hi to my friend Carmen out in Colorado as well. But if you'll notice, these hexagonal tubes are like the Swiss Army knives of the aliens. So my theory is that one of these huge engines was actually plugged into the back of the moon, and then the moon traveled face first, which is why you have all these very deep craters on the surface of the moon, because it was traveling in one direction, and that might be another reason why the moon in its orbit only shows its face to us, not its backside, because it's shy. And that the moon is actually rotating around that direction. I don't know if there's bases on the moon, there's all kinds of stuff. So the scientific stuff that we know about the moon, as an example, is, again, it's a hollow titanium yttrium sphere. It's covered by iron oxide, which is also interesting because there are mining operations all over the surface of the moon. There are these giant, these what we call X-drones, these huge X-shaped machines or devices, and one arm will actually flail against the side of a crater, and then it rotates around and seems to suck it up like a vacuum. Because if you crush a ton of iron oxide, you get about 3/4 of a ton of oxygen. Also, lunar soil is immensely fertile. Chris Kraft, who was the head of NASA, actually did a Disney documentary where he took a little tiny bit of lunar soil and actually sprinkled it into a potted plant that they had in the laboratory. And within a couple of weeks, the plant just grew. I mean, it almost took over the laboratory. It grew so big and so huge. So the original plan of the Apollo mirrored a military operation that was run by General Arthur Trudeau, which was called Project Horizon. And that was to simply just basically shoot up a whole series of like giant mobile homes, if you will, up to the surface of the moon, land them, and then the lunar rover, which Dave Scott drove, its purpose, why put a car on the moon? Its purpose was to go then link all of these giant tubular structures together, so you would have a base. And that's in essence what we did at the North Pole of the moon. The reason we also have the reason our Cape Malabar radio, which is our lunar base, is up there at the North Pole is because as it rotates, obviously it can be in laser communication with the Earth. We have a whole secondary system, by the way, of communicating with everything we have out in space. The Apollo guys used it for a medical frequency, where they would switch over to frequency B when they would say, "Oh, I took a dump in my suit," or I'm leaking urine or something, when they had some kind of medical thing going on. But we communicate with all our stuff with a laser-based system, and so up at the surface of the moon, because it's on the top, it's in constant communication with the Earth as opposed to stuff on the backside. I was just telling you about the scientific stuff. And one other thing too is that I went to Oxford University for astrological summer school. Well, I went to Exeter College. Right next to Exeter, not only is it what they call the Oxford Camera, the big circular building there, but underneath Exeter and underneath all of Oxford is what's called the Bodleian Library. And the Bodleian Library has ever published, and they have an entire room which actually shows for hundreds of years. It's called it's basically the Royal Astronomical Observatory Room, where they record all kinds of movements and all kinds of things on the surface of the moon, lights and bridges and all kinds of stuff. So I've been talking about this stuff forever. I mean, and having astronauts bring me stuff like photographs and things from the surface of the moon, which is another reason why the moon landing was not fake. One, because there is atmosphere on the moon, the gravity is different, and clouds that say the surface of the moon. Anyway,
thank you very much. Thank you very much.
God bless you. God bless everybody. Once again, if anybody wants to write me, it's P.O. Box 24549, Tucson, Arizona, 85734, and my number here is 730-55112. And I'd appreciate any donations via Western Union or and write me a letter, and I promise to goodness I'll write you back. God bless you, JP. Say hi to Becky for me. Love you guys, and like I said, my appeal is moving forward, so I should be out of here.
And there he goes.